This episode brought to you by How to Write Manga, your complete guide to the secrets of Japanese comic book storytelling. Available wherever fine ebooks are sold.
The world has gone insane. Cosplayers rule the conventions. Gamers dominate the tabletop and the internet. Sci-fi subjugates the movies, and fantasy rules the bookstore with an iron fist. Only one group can bring order to this unruly mob. A team of uber geeks, masters of the nerdly arts, trained for decades in the hobby shops and basements of the nation. Mobilized by the secret masters, they are the Department of Nerdly Affairs.
Hello, operatives, and welcome to the Department of Nerdly Affairs. I'm your host, Rob Patterson, here with my co-host, Don Chisholm.
Wee. No, I need a theremin. I gotta get a theremin somewhere.
Okay, well, Don's off searching for a theremin. Tonight's topic is, appropriately enough, since this is our Halloween show for 2017, going to be horror. A few months back, we talked about horror role-playing games, but now we're going whole hog. We're going down to hell itself. We're talking horror. And who better to take a fun ride to hell with than Paul Ellard Cooley of Shadow Publications, of the Dead Robot Society podcast, and horror author extraordinaire. Welcome to the show, Paul.
Thank you very much. I would give my evil laugh, but I'm afraid my throat would probably crack up and I'd end up coughing, so I'm not going to do my bwah, because I can't quite do it.
Okay, well, I appreciate that. It's the thought that counts.
You know, I'm supposed to be scary.
Oh, there we go. That's nice and scary.
That's not bad.
Yeah. All right, that's pretty good. All right, so let's start off, since our topic tonight is horror, let's start off with, well, what is horror? I think we should probably define that first. So, Paul, how would you define horror?
Wow, this is a topic of conversation we've had on DRS in multiple panels at multiple cons. Oh boy, horror is not really a genre. Horror is a sensation. It is a visceral response to stimuli. It is when a image, a sound, or a thought reverberates around your head, gives you goose pimples, and makes you shrink back. It does something, it touches some core part of us, some part of our reptilian brain that turns on a flight syndrome rather than a fight syndrome. You get the flight response. It's something you want to get away from. It's something that paralyzes you. It's something that shocks you. It's something that sends you quaking in your boots to your mama.
I'm officially scared. That was a great rendition, sir. Bravo. Okay, so that's an interesting point. Okay, so you don't consider horror a genre. Would you consider it kind of like almost then a meta-genre that actually like covers such a big, it's kind of an umbrella of a whole bunch of different things together then?
It's, this is probably not putting it quite the right way, but if you consider mystery, you consider fantasy, you consider science fiction like space opera and whatnot.
Right.
If those are foods, then those are the steak, the chicken, and the pork. Mm-hmm. Horror would be the spice. It would be what you marinate that meat in. It is what flavors it. Is what directs the atmosphere of the work. It is that palpable sense that at any moment this character that hopefully the author or filmmaker has spent a whole lot of time getting you to love is in imminent danger of getting snuffed out.
Right.
And that you feel it. That's what it is.
Okay. Okay, well, Don, what do you think?
I think I kind of agree, but kind of don't, but kind of do.
Well, that's very Canadian.
Are you going to be at the UN soon? Are you running for a dignitary there?
Oh, no, if you knew me in person, I don't have the charm for that. Well, like I said, it's the Tor Johnson thing, that kind of time for negotiate treaty. But anyway. But we did we talked about horror role playing games, like tabletop games specifically, and I think since we did that, it kind of gives you a cheat to get in, because role-playing games rely a lot on vicarious participancy, more so than any other kind of story. Mm-hmm. And we talked about horror as its own separate thing. And I think you're right that it's a way of flavorizing other stories. But I think what's happened is over the years, we've kind of standardized it into there's like, I've got 8 basic types of horror, but we standardize it into its own thing. And a lot of people come to think of it as its own thing. And the part where I would agree with you, though, is you're saying it's not necessarily a thing unto itself. And I think that that's true. And I think it kind of highlights the idea that any kind of academic look, any kind of categorizing stories, it's a good idea from an academic point of view. But I don't think it pays creators or the audience to necessarily get totally caught up in the idea.
The idea of what? The idea of genre?
Yeah, the idea of something specific. And I say that because when I look at my list of types of horror, I've got very broad ones, but you can see how as soon as you call something a certain type of story, rather than using that as a descriptor for something that people have already produced, people they tend to jump onto that formula as a way to produce that sort of thing and maintain, I'm doing finger quotes here, quality, as opposed to entertainment or just doing something genuinely novel.
So you're saying that we don't want to standardize horror, or are you just against genres in general?
Well, it's like I tend to be an iconoclast myself, but it's that idea that you can consider it its own thing, but not to get too caught up in the specifics of that, because you will miss out on either creating something that's new and different, or even as an audience member, if it doesn't hit the checklist, you're going to be turned off from it, even if it really is something new and different and worth partaking of.
Right. Well, as we both have long established, audiences don't really want anything new and different. They just want the same old, but with a new flavor added to it.
Yeah, kind of.
Oh God! Unfortunately, I understand what you're saying, but at the same time, it's the way I think of it. Maybe it's because I'm coming from the creation background. And that's not to diminish you haven't created anything. That's not to say you haven't. Take Lovecraft, for instance. Lovecraft, if you take the horror element out, what does he write? What does he write?
Really weird science fiction.
He writes science fiction suspense, and he writes thrillers. That's what he really writes. The horror element, however, the way he added to it, is what got him on the map. Otherwise, no one would even know who he is. He would just be lost in the annals of pulp. It is the edge of a special kind of horror, his kind of horror that he brought to those tales. Therefore, it kind of follows. I mean, I'm writing a science fiction / horror series right now, and I'm probably going to keep doing that for a while because it's fun. I just love it. But the 8 different types of horror, I want to hear what these are. What are these?
Actually, you've hit, and again, I think we're agreeing, but coming at it from a different way. You've mentioned one of the ones I've got on my list is the Lovecraftian stuff.
Okay.
And I say that because you're absolutely right. He does. They're more like a suspense story. There's a sci-fi element to it. He presents it as horror, but he presents it as a specific kind. In that it's not that the universe is out to get humanity, it's just that we really don't count. like Cthulhu doesn't set out to eat you, it just sort of happens as he's passing through doing whatever it is he's doing.
The universe just doesn't care. We're the insects, basically. We're nothing.
Yeah, and what happens is he does that, and it creates something new, and we can call something a Lovecraftian horror. And anybody who's familiar with his work will know what you're talking about, and it becomes sort of a genre, even though it kind of just starts up as him doing a new twist on something established. And then the problem that you kind of get, like I was saying, is once you've defined it like that, people will gravitate towards, I'm going to write a Lovecraftian horror story. And what you tend to get when that happens is the same thing over and over, because people are too caught up in the specifics of your definition rather than just doing stuff.
Gotcha.
Because that kind of goes another type of horror that I have. I call it slasher horror.
Mm-hmm.
And anybody who was alive in the 80s, if you ever saw like direct-to-video movies, you know that it's that's basically, and it's mutant guy chops up kids in a small thing. And that kind of idea, again, it's you've got this very specific set of rules that define it, and that's cool after the fact, but you have to be careful of getting caught up in that, otherwise you get what we had in the 80s, where every single slasher film eventually was exactly the same with a slightly different mutant.
Yeah. Okay.
It's funny you mentioned that, because the co-host on Dead Robot Society, Terry Mixon, if you say horror, he only thinks of Jason and Michael Myers. That's all he thinks about.
Right.
That's all he thinks. He has personally gotten to the point where he identifies the word horror as those movies.
Okay.
And I think there is some of that going on, where you do have some identification with that. But as I'm sure we will discuss later, that is a really simplified way of looking at it.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Yes, it is. But again, it's interesting though, because Terry is quite a bit older, isn't he? Like, can you give us our age range? You don't have to tell us how old he actually is, but how old is Terry roughly?
I think he's 52.
Oh, he's not that old then.
Yeah.
Okay. The way he talks, I keep thinking he's like in his 60s or something like that.
No, he just looks it.
Oh.
Oh, he's not going to listen to this. I can talk shit about him.
Even if he does, it's okay.
Yeah, because we don't live with him.
Exactly.
He looks like freaking Gandalf these days. It's kind of crazy.
Oh, okay. No. For sure. He always talks about himself and refers to himself as being old. So I thought, he must be at least in his 60s or something like that. Oh.
No, it's just the fact that all the hosts, in fact, Justin is younger than I am. So all the hosts Terry's been with, he's been the old man.
Oh,
He's the old man of the show.
Right. Oh, that makes sense. That makes sense. Can I ask roughly how old you are, Paul?
I am 46.
So you're the same age I am then.
Yeah, it's pretty
Oh,
good.
you poor bastard.
Yeah.
I hope your body's in better shape.
No, it's not.
That is very unfortunate. I'm sorry to hear it.
Yeah. Folks, never become 46. Just trust us on this one. You don't want to be us.
Shit, never become 30.
Yeah, that's true.
That's when it all started to break, at 30.
Yeah, that's true. Apparently, they had the right idea on Logan's Run. That was a mercy killing.
Yeah, it's a mercy killing. It just means you got to pack in a lot of experiences in 20 years.
Yeah, but they had free sex and drugs, so I think they could manage, actually, if I remember right.
Like I said, you had to pack in a lot of experience in 20 years.
Yep, and they did.
Yes.
All right, so that's 2 types of horror then, Don. What are the other 6 kinds?
The other ones that I had on my list is I put down, and these are really, like I said, they're kind of vague notions, because I'm not super interested. I'm interested in the genealogy in terms of like study, but not in a broad defining kind of sense. But I got what I called existential or personal horror, and that was that came up in the role-playing game episode. That's the idea where you are the monster.
Okay.
And it's like literally say the Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, or the werewolf thing, or to look at films, if you think of a film like M with Peter Lorre, where he was like this like axe murderer, like going around killing kids kind of thing, and it was a movie more from his point of view. It's that idea of the personal horror that you're dealing with kind of inside your own head.
You're going mad, basically, or not, as the case may be.
Yeah.
Or sane in a mad world.
Yeah, there's different takes. I think, again, that touches on, like, say, the Invasion of the Body Snatchers idea. It touches on that, but that also comes from other types of stuff. Like, that's more like there's an external threat to that, but the main concern is for your own internal safety. It's for your own mind, your own soul kind of thing.
Right. Okay. So would The Thing, the Carpenter version, obviously, would that fall into that category too?
It does, and it approaches another one actually on my list. That's a newer one, is what I've seen called body horror.
Oh, yes.
Visceral.
Yeah, well, there's the body horror, like the visceral one is kind of like comes for the slasher flick. The idea of injury, or it's also the idea of like your body rebelling against you.
Right.
Like I think the first movie example I can think of that would be like Videodrome.
Well, how about, no, isn't there there was that other one that Carpenter did before then, wasn't there? The one with, like, the worms that made everyone have sex.
Oh, Shivers.
Shivers, yeah.
Yeah, I think he could... say again?
I don't think I've ever seen that one. And I thought I had seen mostly everything Carpenter done. I have not seen that.
Shivers? Oh, it's a messed up movie.
Yes, it is. Oh,
Imagine that.
Actually, here's a weird thing. You know the whole like scene in Aliens where he like leans over the egg and the egg and he comes out and it grabs his face.
Yeah,
that was done in Shivers first, a couple years before. Like that's actually a ripoff of a scene in Shivers.
Yeah, kind
Shivers
of.
predates it. Yeah,
interesting.
Yeah, because Shivers they'd go mouth to mouth, so people would like kiss you and this little thing would dig down your throat and then it would like, it would like mess y'all up and. It's a really disturbing movie. And yes, that is a recommendation.
All right, yeah. I'm writing that down right now.
Wait, that wasn't Carpenter? That was Cronenberg.
Cronenberg.
Yeah, it's Cronenberg, not
okay.
Carpenter. Cronenberg.
Okay.
I always get those two mixed up, but yeah, that's David Cronenberg, who of course is also Canadian, which is probably why we've seen it because Canadian content.
Yeah,
we have this rule up here that Canadian stuff gets played to death.
Yes.
They have to play a certain percentage of Canadian content on the air, TV, etc. So a lot of Canadian stuff gets played way more than you'd think. So that's why any Canadian content, we've seen it. That's just kind of the way it goes.
What's the Cronenberg movie with the two brothers who are gynecologists?
Oh,
Dead Ringers.
Yeah,
Dead Ringers. Thank you.
Yep.
That falls into the visceral and also into the psychological category.
Yeah.
Easily.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. It's because I brought up the thing that Carpenter came to mind. Carpenter's a whole other kettle of fish.
We can talk Carpenter all night.
Yeah, we can. Oh, yes, we can. I should say pile of guts, not kettle of fish. That would make it a better term.
Pile of guts.
Okay,
that's gonna be my next pulp novel. Pile of guts.
Pile of Guts by Paul E. Cooley. There we go.
Awesome.
And your audience would probably be like, yeah, it sounds like Paul.
Well, my audience would be like, all right, what crazy bullshit is he doing this time? Is he just trolling us, or is there really going to be is this really a slasher book?
Well, considering that you were the fellow that did, I believe it was called The Street, right?
Yeah.
And I think your audience is well aware that you're going to do anything and everything. From our audience who probably don't know what I'm talking about, tell us what The Street is, Paul.
Oh boy. The Street is what happens to Sesame Street after PBS gets canceled. All the puppets are actually alive, and they are left to their own devices. And I like to think of it as a mix between 40s noir and New Jack City, which was a movie made at the beginning of the crack epidemic. That's pretty much what it is. And Oscar the Grouch plays private detective, and all the stories are told from his point of view. And it's bad. It is bad. It is bad. I should feel shame for writing it, but it gave so many people so much joy in a really warped and twisted way that I just cannot feel bad for it. So,
yep, go check it out, people. The Street.
It's no longer available.
Oh no! Really? You pulled it? Why? Why?
Pulled it. I was told that I could get in hot water in certain situations, and so I had to pull it.
Oh, okay. We can. Okay, say no more. Okay, got it. That's not entirely a surprise, but yeah.
I still have probably like 30 or 40 copies of the paperback hanging out here somewhere.
Well, you push them at cons, I assume.
I actually just kind of give them away. I can't really sell them, so I just give them away in certain situations.
Right.
But yeah, it definitely will ruin your childhood. If you have fond memories of Sesame Street and the Muppets, oh my God, I did terrible, horrible things. I mean, some of the puppets are serial killers. Some of them go crazy. They're all snorting dough, which is a new drug Cookie Monster made. It's just insane. Puppets being prostitutes. It's just bad news all the way around.
Right.
So, that sounds awesome.
If you do enough Googling, I'm sure you will find somebody with a tour of the audiobook out there somewhere.
There's an
actual audiobook version. I didn't know that. Okay.
Oh, yeah, that's what it started out as, because I podcast the first story called Stuffing, and for an online con, and when I was done, I was like, oh, this is just a lark. I was really pissed off because Mitt Romney was talking about how Big Bird needed to get a job. And since most of my early memories, especially when I was in Canada, the only time I saw people of color was on Sesame Street.
Yeah, would be.
And because I was pretty introverted, Sesame Street, The Electric Company, and shows like that were pretty much what I grew up on. It was the only thing that was really familiar to me that seemed American while I was in Canada.
Right.
So I have fond memories of that and the Muppet Show, and Stuffing was I was just being brutal because I just had this idea of doing the social commentary on things, and so I wrote it, and I was like, it's a lark, it'll make people cringe and laugh, and that'll be that. What happened instead was it got done, and they were like, when's the next Street Story?
Right. Yeah.
And I was like, okay. So I wrote one every Christmas for my fans that listen to the podcast. I wrote a new one for them. And then it was just kind of like, you know what, guys, if I put a book together and write two more, a novelette and a novella for this, will you guys buy the book? And they said, shut up and take my money. So that's how it got into a full length experience.
Right. Okay. Well, there's one more for your list, Don. Puppet horror.
Puppet horror. Actually, what happened? You might have hit on an actual new kind of horror, not specifically puppet horror. I'm thinking of The Simpsons. Sock monkeys. No, but anyway.
Oh, God.
But the idea of what the heck would you call anti-nostalgia? The idea
anti-nostalgia and anthropomorphization, which I can't even pronounce that word, but yeah, nega nostalgia.
Yeah,
let's use a Lovecraft term. It's a nega psychic is a nega nostalgia. There we go.
Because that's that idea of because in the last say decade or so, our childhoods have been mined constantly for stuff, but that idea of looking back at your childhood and finding it was a flaming pile of poop after all kind of thing. So I'm wondering if that would count as a whole new, you've inadvertently created a whole new genre.
Wow.
I don't know. Yeah. I was just doing satire parody and lacing it with as much social commentary as I possibly do while making it really hilarious. That was my plan. And funny in the sense where you go, oh dear God, and then you start giggling and you hate yourself for it. So yeah, that was fun. I'll have to do that again. I just haven't found the topic, and I could only do that because I loved Sesame Street so much. I was only able to destroy it that much. But
right.
Oscar had his own code, and there were good puppets and good people there. So it was just everybody was Lord of the Flies with puppets.
Yeah.
The more you talk about it, the better it sounds.
Well, yeah, and Oscar's also got a very foul mouth. Big
right,
surprise.
Of course.
Big surprise.
Oscar the Grouch, of course he does, yeah.
And he's a raging alcoholic, which is just even funnier, but that's another story. Remind me, and we'll see if we can hook you up with something.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. All right, so we should probably get back on the horror track for a bit. That was I think we do. wow, anti-nostalgia horror? I don't know how to even describe it, but okay. So what are the other kinds of horror you've managed to come up with, Don?
One straightforward is I considered like the thriller, the suspense story, the mystery story.
Okay, thriller, suspense, mystery.
Yeah, do you have one specific in mind?
The one that I kind of that for it kind of bridges the gap because there's possibly a monster in it, but that really kind of stuck with me, messed me up when I was a kid, was the original Curse of the Cat People.
Oh,
Curse of the Cat People. Good Christ. Is that, what was that, 50s?
Oh, I was like earlier. I was like 38 or 42.
Well, that was the original Cat People. I thought, because there's more than one Cat People movie.
Yeah. The other one was made in the 70s or early 80s, was Natasha Kinski and...
Yeah, there was that one.
Shit, I can't remember the other name of the B-movie actor.
Malcolm
the
McDowell.
name of, but he played the other cat. I'm talking about the guy who was the quote-unquote protagonist.
Oh.
Her boyfriend. I can't remember his name.
Oh.
Uh-oh, somebody's Googling.
No.
Yeah. That's interesting. I don't think I've ever seen the original on there.
Because the second one is kind of the better film.
Right.
Because
I barely remember it.
It was the whole premise of the story is this guy meets this like woman and he falls for her, but she thinks that if she falls in love, she turns into a werecat and will kill him.
Mm-hmm.
And all throughout the movie, kind of until the very end, you're not exactly sure if she's like a monster or just crazy.
Right.
So when you get to the end, Kate, 60-year-old spoiler alert, she's just crazy. Like
she's just crazy.
She gets killed.
Okay.
In the original one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Curse of the Cat People they made a couple years later, and what it is the guy gets married and they have a daughter, and she's like, I think she must be like 4 or 5.
Right.
And she starts talking about her invisible friend. And the mother's like, who's this? Like, what's she talking about? Well, the husband recognizes her invisible friend sounds like this crazy woman she met.
Mm.
And you're never exactly sure, is the kid just imagining it? Is it really something? And there's a scene at the end that as a little kid screwed me up where she's looking, the daughter's looking into the garden. She's saying, well, this woman's there. She wants me to come with her. And the family's begging her not to go. And in the end, she doesn't. And it's really creepy. And you're never, even at the end when the kid decides to stay, you're still not 100% sure what happened. And yeah, as a little kid, I must have been like 2 or 3 when I saw it. And that screwed me up really, really bad.
Well, there's your problem. Here, hold my beer. I'm going to watch Alien when I'm 8 years old.
I did.
Yeah.
I did.
So did I.
Yeah. And I was fine with that because that's just a thing eating people. I can wrap my head around that. But as a little kid, this idea of this, like, because as a little kid, you're vaguely aware of imagination and reality are different, but your brain hasn't solidified enough that you can really put a finger on what's what.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's why that ending screwed me up, because we had, like, the house we were living in had, like, bay doors going into the backyard, kind of like the ones in the house, and I got afraid to walk into the backyard at night because of that for the longest time.
Mm. Okay. Wow, I could see that.
Mm.
My similar experience was the movie version of Salem's Lot.
Oh.
And I remember there's the classic scene where the vampire kid's at the window tapping away.
Yeah.
And I saw, and for months after that, if I woke up during that, I'd stare at my window when I was a kid, waiting or looking for some vampire kid to show up and start tapping on my window. That like freaked me the hell out.
Is that the David Soul version?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. Just making sure.
It's like 79 or 80. Because, yeah, that messed up all my friends, too.
Yeah, that actually is a really creepy ass scene because the way I can't remember what the kid's name is. The way he's floating.
At the
window.
Outside. Yeah.
That's what it looks like. He's floating. Of course, in the book they don't float, but that's what makes it so creepy, because he's there and he's ethereal, but he's knocking on the window.
Yeah, tap, 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 tap. I even remember it, even to this day. Tap, tap, tap. And it's just that tapping at the window. And it's just like, no, that's how much it affected me. I'm still remembering this like 30 years later and getting, more than 30 years, and getting shivers. Just because it's just such a creepy scene. We'll put it in the show notes, folks. I'm sure I can find a clip of it on YouTube so that other people can traumatize themselves. So I was actually watching earlier today, in preparation for the show, I was watching a documentary called Nightmares, Red, White, and Blue about American horror. And they actually they showed a clip from The Cat People, that's why it's fresh in my mind. But they also showed there's another movie that's basically like a Cat People type movie that came out just almost right afterwards.
No, there were a bunch.
Okay, so it was kind of like a spate of these things of like, you know, Cougars in the City or whatever. Like
that's
movies.
if you go back and you look at the films, that's really what it is. You can almost track it decade by decade.
Yeah.
Right.
What the trends are. I mean, once The Exorcist came out, what did we have? We had a shit ton of religious horror movies up till probably 88 or so. And then you, of course, had the slashers that were coming in the 80s, and that kind of followed into the 90s, and then we got things like Child's Play, and then we got Hellraiser, and we got everything got mishmashed, but it was all about weirding, those parts of the experience. I mean, we didn't get another Hell House kind of flick for a very long time, not until Poltergeist.
True. That's true.
So it took a while for things to come full circle, so to speak, because I think the first, if you really think about it, the first horror stories have got to be considered ghost stories.
Yeah.
And once you get humankind out of their caves, well, hell, maybe even in the caves, they're spooky. It's got to be the fear of what's behind that bush.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
It's got to be the fear of what is that sound? What does that light in the sky mean? What those kinds of things. The things that you would consider paranormal or supernatural. And that's what horror was really first associated with, I think.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I'd say you're right. I think so. I mean, we have this instinct in us. I think it's a self-preservation instinct from the time when the world was a much more dangerous place for human beings, and I think that we have that natural fear in us and that's what horror plays on. We have this built-in it's again originally for self-preservation, but now it's just kind of, it creates fear, it creates anxiety in us. It's not quite helpful in the modern world because it's kind of overstimulated and overreacting, but it's that sense of self-preservation, that fear in us.
It's fight or flight, and it that's why it exists. Is basically it's like, okay, the rational part of your mind goes away, and the remainder of the reptilian brain that we have says, I can either duke this out because I can't escape, or I can run like hell.
Yep.
What do I do? What do I do? And we're herd animals, so really we want to run with the herd. We do, and part of our self-preservation is to basically not be alone, which is another reason why isolation is such a fertile playground. I'm sorry, am I drooling? Let me wipe that off my fang here.
Well, actually, there's a weird aside for a moment, but I'm going to ask it anyway. As a horror writer, aren't cell phones like the most horrible thing in the world? I mean, I know they almost killed mysteries.
Well, yes, and I've found creative ways to deal with that, and they are difficult. They are a serious pain in the ass to deal with, and especially when what I call or what they call in the films a bottle story is where you take the characters and you're basically putting them in a situation where they cannot get out. Right. They're stuck. I did that with the Black, and actually all three Black books are like that. And with the Derelict series, they're out there in space, and there is no one coming to help them. So they're more or less trapped in deep ass end of space out past Pluto. Those are fun because you can rip away all the layers of security that communication gives us. And it'd be really, really hard to make films like Friday the 13th or Halloween with cell phones. Yep. But at the same time, there are ways around it, which is not everybody has got good coverage. Phones run out of battery power when they're used as flashlights for long enough. People don't always have their shit charged when the bad stuff goes down, or a storm can take out a cell tower.
That's true.
But that you just have to kind of plan for. Or people are trapped in a building where the cell phones just plain don't work. You just have to set that up at the very beginning that here's a constraint, and now we're going to mess with the constraint because these people are going to try and use email, they're going to try and send text, they're going to try and call. How do you prevent them from doing it? Part of a writer's job is to say, who are these people, what do they want, and how can I keep them from getting it?
Yep. And actually, if you think about it, the modern young people, they are so addicted to their cell phones and so attached to them that actually the idea of being unable to use the cell network, not being cut off, is actually a horror in and of itself.
Yep.
For them, that actually is another level of horror.
Have you seen the movie? Crap! Now I can't remember what it's called. It's about a shit. What is this thing called?
Don't worry, you can swear on this podcast. It's okay.
Oh, sorry. I'll do it anyway. Unfriended. Have you seen that?
No, I haven't. Okay.
It's a, I guess you could call it a found footage film, which of course were all the rage and still are.
Well, they're super cheap.
Yeah, they're super cheap to make. And you know, if it's done well, you can do some really cool stuff with it. It's basically about a group of boneheads who are stalked by a ghost on social media.
Okay.
It's pretty creepy. It will give you a little bit of a shiver. There's some dumb stuff in it, but it actually wasn't that bad of a film. I expected it to be much, much worse, so it was enjoyable.
Right.
But that's the kind of thing. What happens when you get an unsolicited text message or a message over Facebook or a DM over Twitter or something along those lines, and you don't know who these people are?
Right.
And it's not a spam. It's something that could be taken out of context, and maybe it's because there is no context, can be seen as a threatening sentence. What does that do to you mentally immediately? It puts up your shields. You immediately get that feeling that there's something wrong. And then, some of us start wondering what we did to piss this person off and whether or not they're going to show up at the door.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. If they have your cell phone number and that, maybe they know where you live.
Considering some of the things I've said on the podcast, I've had people backhack my address. And in the process, it hasn't turned out to be a bad thing. There was the one letter I got that was a little creepy, but my patrons have sent me tobacco. They've sent me alcohol. They have sent me Steins from Germany. They have sent me you name it. They've sent it to me.
Huh, wow, so, that's cool.
But the thing is, anybody's address in this day and age can be backhacked. Anybody's telephone number can be backhacked. So you really don't have a sense of privacy anymore. Yep,
that's true. Yeah. And so in that we're going back to, because you don't have that sense of privacy, that you're vulnerable, and so that's why it's really easy to throw people off, especially young people in a modern setting.
Yeah.
With if they start receiving unwanted attention through their phones or other things. Yeah, definitely.
I mean, can you imagine what would happen if John Wayne Gacy was running around in this day and age?
I'd rather not.
I mean, seriously, if you took a serial killer type like that, or Son of Sam, or whomever,
right?
And imagine Jeffrey Dahmer getting his victims through Grindr. I mean, come on.
Yep.
The stories write themselves. You just basically take something from real life and put it in modern times, and it's easy to see where it would go.
Oh yeah.
Well, they've had that.
No,
they've had that happen. That they've had people that would stalk somebody on different and kill them, and a common thing is crooks will wait till you publish. We're leaving on vacation tomorrow, 30 weeks in Florida, and then they rob your house.
Correct, and that stuff happens. I was actually, when I first started my podcast, was going to create something called Fiend Feed, And what was going to be is all the Fiend's tales I was writing at the time, and those were all like first person, told from the point of view of the serial killer or monster or whatever they are. I was going to create stalking maps for them. And I was in love with the idea, and then one day I realized, wait a minute, this could actually be used as an idea for some, never mind, I'm not doing this. I'm not going to do this. But, you know, the concept was really the reason why it stuck in my head is because I could see it being done so easily. And in this day and age, as one of those things that kind of terrifies me is that it's very, very difficult to tell if that person at the door is going to be one of the crazy tribe.
Right.
So, you don't know.
You never know what's going to happen. Well, that's part of the fun.
Plus, sometimes, you know, if the guy looks like Tor Johnson's wearing a spiked codpiece, you kind of know where this is going. Yeah. I'm just saying. We've all had that.
I know which part of the anatomy my bulldog is going to go after.
All right. So, did we cover all your types of horror, Don?
There's 3 left.
Okay, what are the 3?
Well, again, I think you guys kind of were hitting at one of the things that I put on the list, and this is again where I don't remember. This is just kind of academic. It's not, you know, writer's guide or nothing. But you were talking about the very first horror stories were ghost stories, and it was always relating to what's just outside the light of the fire kind of thing. To that end, I say some of the earliest stories that we could call horror stories, which were written to purposely scare people as to keep them in line and teach them stuff, would be things like fables or folk tales or fairy tales.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, especially some of those fairy tales, the original versions were pretty brutal.
Yep.
The original Grimm's fairy tale. Well, if you think about it, vampires are nothing more than a cautionary tale for women.
Yeah,
the original vampire tales. If you don't believe all the legend and lore, but if you study the legend and lore, you really realize that really that's about women taking care of themselves and not trusting strangers and sticking with the family and kind of doing what the family says. These are all cautionary tales that were kind of passed down for those reasons. And the Grimm's fairy tales are very much the same. They do not have happy endings. The witch doesn't get killed by the huntsman or whatever else. Nah, man, all the pretty people die. That's how that works.
Yeah. Yeah, fairy tales were in some ways they are horror stories. Actually, a bunch of them are horror stories.
Sure.
Yeah. And remember too that you're when you think like we tend to think of the Grimm's tales and that's kind of like a European thing. If you look at say like Eastern European, some of like the Russian folklore, a lot of the Asian folklore, it's exactly like you were saying. They're these little moral lessons wrapped up in a story you tell the kids that teaches them, make sure you listen to mom and dad, don't talk to strangers, don't wander off into the woods.
Yeah. That's what they're there for.
Yep.
Because the stories teach better lessons. Well, the stories will stick with you when mom and dad say don't do that. That's not going to stick with you.
Yeah.
Oh no.
So I mean, we are essentially the product of narrative, and we start thinking in narrative when we're 3 or 4 years old. When we start playing with when my generation was playing with G.I. Joes and Hot Wheels cars and shit like that, and we were making up stories or Legos, we were beginning the narrative process right there at the beginning.
Yeah.
Yep. Absolutely. Well, human beings are built for narrative. We're built to remember stories because it's a survival mechanism, right? Because basically what you're doing is you're crowdsourcing knowledge and you're crowdsourcing information. You're learning that, that caveman Sam was almost killed by a saber-toothed tiger, but he threw dirt in the tiger's eyes and he escaped. Well, if you encounter a saber-toothed tiger now, you'll know throw dirt in its eyes and you can run away.
Yep.
I mean, that's a survival mechanism. I mean, the people who learn from stories are the ones who survived, and the ones who didn't, didn't.
The ones who didn't were the ones that came out the other end.
That's exactly right. Yeah, and so we're literally wired for story. We're wired to remember stories. That's why I'm a teacher at a local community college, And one of the things I tell my business students, we're doing practice for interviewers, for job interviews, and I always tell them, if you want to be remembered, tell them a story. Mm-hmm. Because if you tell your future employer a story, they will remember you. If you can tell them some personal story that's connected and links you with the job in some way and sets you up, that will get remembered. The people who sit there and talk about all their accomplishments, they will never be remembered. It's storytelling. That's what gets you in.
Yeah.
And because we're wired for story. That's just the way humans are. Yeah. And that's awesome.
Yep.
Sort of. Well, it also means we find patterns in stories where there aren't really any. Yeah. And we try to we're pattern making machines, so we try to create stories, and that's where we get like conspiracy theories, and we get all sorts of stupid, crazy crap.
And literary critics.
Yeah, well, them too. Yeah, them too, who find meanings in every single word of writing that may or may not originally have been meant to be there. Yeah.
Let me tell you, one of the greatest courses I ever took in college was literary criticism, because what we had to do was we studied 10 different schools of literary criticism, and then we read Frankenstein, and we had to pick 4 schools of literary criticism to dissect Mary Shelley's Frankenstein with.
Right.
So I chose the feminist, the communist, what was it, the naturalist, and I can't remember the 4th one. I can't remember. Anyway, the point of it was to put yourself in the shoes of somebody who believed in that school. Mm-hmm. And what you found is that if you want to lie your freaking ass off, it is not real hard. And it is not real difficult to come up with the craziest propagandist bullshit from a length of text. It is just too damned easy. And people do not really sit there and think about just how easy it is to isolate something and then make it the focus and then try and make it fit throughout the rest of the narrative, and that you can actually do it. Logically do it. It's scary. Really scary.
Yeah. Well, that's how, like Rob was saying, you get conspiracy theories. And I got to say, nowadays, what I find horrifying is it's tough to come up with any kind of nerdly entertainment that keeps you ahead of the curve of some of the things that people really believe.
Have you seen all the trouble South Park's been having since Trump got elected? I rest my freaking case.
Well, there's my current favorite conspiracy that I just heard about last week was how John Benet Ramsey didn't actually die. Have you heard this one?
No.
Oh, God.
Have you heard it?
No, I have not heard this.
What? Is she Melania Trump?
No, what happened was... No, this is better. She was kidnapped by the Illuminati, who raised her in their secret Illuminati ways. And
what?
This is what happened. And they used, because of her like natural charisma, that they turned her into like a performer who would spread Illuminati values through their products, and that's who Katy Perry is.
What?
Yeah, and that would make an awesome movie. And I'm like, I couldn't come up with that. Like, seriously, that I never would have put those ideas together like that.
It's
God.
The Manchurian Candidate. Somebody just ripped off the Manchurian Candidate plot and gave it a twist.
Yeah, but with like a touch of lizard people and breasts. I mean, like, holy smokes.
They live now with more breasts.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, that's basically what it is. I'm like, oh man, that is wow. That is just okay.
Yeah.
But how do you compete?
You have to be weirder than the next person.
Which I used to think I was until the last few years.
Here's the thing. It's like I know all these writers who I think are just, amazingly imaginative, fantastic people. And I read some of their books and I'm like, man, I could never come up with something like that. And then I'll meet them at cons. They'll be like, man, I can't believe you came up with that, blah, blah, blah. And that was really cool. And it's like, I just ripped off the following 4 things to make that story. Now I'm beginning to think you ripped off 4 or 5 things from other stories. And now I think about it, you know what? You're just as big as fraud as I am.
Someone once said that writers are some of the greatest thieves alive.
Oh yeah, if you're not stealing, you ain't doing it right. The adage is good writers borrow, great writers steal.
Oh yeah, there we go.
What? That was a Simpsons episode.
Probably they've ripped off everything else. So when you say stuff like that, and since we're talking about horror, when I think of The Simpsons, I just remember Christopher Walken reading Goodnight Moon. Oh, it was freaking creepy. Oh my god. Oh. Go find that clip on YouTube, folks. Show that one to your kids.
We'll put it in the show notes.
Was that the one with the scooching?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, kid, where you going? Scooch over. I think it was also had Stephen King reading something. I can't remember what it was. He was just wackadoo. But, yeah. It's like that. Theft is what we do, man. Theft is what filmmakers do. Theft is what writers do. Theft is what artists do. There's only so much things, or only so many things that can quote unquote be new. And since we've been around telling stories, and shit, the Gilgamesh was it's what almost 1,500 years long or earlier than the Bible, something like that.
Yeah.
It's the oldest story that we know of, and you look at that. Well, Jesus Christ, man! Tolkien, Star Wars, you name it, was all ripped off from Gilgamesh.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
the Bible is ripped off from Gilgamesh. I mean, there's nothing new under the sun, guys, because it's already been done, and those people are long dead. All we're doing is rewriting the same stories and putting different features together.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. Aristotle was complaining back in 3rd century BC about how it had all been done in his book Poetics, and basically saying, yeah, here are the standard stories. Here's what we always see. Yeah, here we go.
Let me ruin entertainment for you for the rest of your life. And Joseph Campbell kind of, if you go look at the hero's journey by him, he did sort of the same thing. But his idea was more of putting it with Jungian collective consciousness.
Right, yeah.
And I like to think of it more in that realm. I think there's all these, if you bring it back to horror, there's all these things that we have running around in our heads. We have ancestral memories of spiders that kill us, snakes that kill us, animals that kill us. Everything was out to kill us. Mm-hmm. And so when we see those things, even if they're species that are not poisonous, are not hazardous, are not dangerous, part of us still recoils. And it's all because of ancestral memory. It has absolutely nothing to do with the fact that I know that's a spider.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There's just something about that gets into some people's head. And obviously some people are okay with it, and some people are absolutely freaking terrified. Those who are arachnophobic.
Yep.
I'm
personally clownophobic, but that's, chlorophobic, I think is what it's called.
Yeah, that's not a phobia. That's just good sense. You're supposed. Clowns are obviously dangerous. That's why they look the way they do.
Oh man, when I wrote the story Mimes, somebody was like, "Oh God, you wrote a horror story about mimes? Isn't that redundant?" Marcel Marceau's coming out with a machete to hack the audience to death, and nobody's surprised.
Well, see, because mimes are horrible and creepy too. Because we had one of the games I ran years ago. The bad guys had androids that they disguised as buskers, and these things would come into important areas, and then they detonate, and they were using landmines.
Oh,
God.
They can't all be winners. But...
Okay, can you mute him?
He's tried.
Yeah.
Turn him into a mime, please.
Yeah, there we go. Don, you're going to be acting out the rest of this podcast episode. Just use sign language, sir.
Yeah, it's going to work really well since none of us have video at the moment.
That's exactly true. That's why we're all still sane.
Yeah, there you
go. All right, so that's the end of your horror list, right, Don?
Two more.
Oh, there's two more to go. Okay, what do you got?
Through these. We keep going on tangents. Sorry.
No, actually,
no, it's okay. It's totally okay. This is actually fun.
You guys keep bringing up stuff that leads to the next one.
Okay.
Because
we're talented.
Yeah, because we were talking about fables, and you'd specifically mentioned vampires, how vampires were warning against like the charming stranger. Out of that, I think, especially getting to like say the 1800s, that you got what I've seen referred to as Gothic romance.
Okay.
Which would be Dracula.
Mm-hmm.
It's a monster story. It's kind of an existential monster story, but there's a certain humanity caught up in it.
Well, that's true. Actually, again, going back to that Nightmares Red, White, and Blue movie, they actually talked about that in the movie, where they said that when Bela Lugosi's Dracula was first released, it was actually pitched to the audience as a romance.
Yeah. They didn't want to call it a horror movie.
Yeah, it was sold. It was actually, so if you think about it, it's actually Twilight 1.0.
Yeah.
Yeah, you could say the same thing about Boris Karloff's The Mummy.
Yeah,
that's true.
Yeah.
It is really a love story. You're just on the outside of it. Watching
true.
It unfold and being completely creeped out about what it's doing, but really it is a love story. And even the Mummy movies with Brendan Fraser, the first two, we won't talk about the third. The first two were awesome. I loved them. They're so good. Cheese, popcorn, they're just fantastic. But that is there too. I mean, the love interest, the love part, the fact that somebody would come back from the dead, to be with their loved one, is something that's very, very palpable and very, very understandable for anyone who's lost someone and stood at their graveside. And there's always that thought. Can I have that person back, please?
Right, yeah.
Because that goes, I think it was in Russia. You go back to like the 15, 16, 1700s. There was a folk tale that if you did grieve for, say, your lost spouse for too long, I forget the name of it. I can't pronounce it anyway. But it was like a type of demon that would come to you in their form, and it would use like your sense of loss to bewitch you, which is kind of the moral get over it kind of thing. But that idea, like that, it goes way, way, way back, and it's something that doesn't come up so much anymore. You got a lot of like the horror novels, if you go back to like say the 1800s, tended to be either really visceral or they were these weird semi-lyrical, like I say, that we'd call them emo nowadays. But well, it's true basically. But it was that idea. It was this idea of these like weird lost loves and the lovers that couldn't be together, not because like their families were at war, but because one of them was like an extra dimensional hell beast or something.
So you've met my ex-girlfriend.
Good night, folks.
Not my wife, my ex-girlfriend.
Yes, of course.
There is a certain element of that goes on. All these things are so interlinked with the culture at the time, and then the successive or the social evolution, we drag that baggage with us. And it changes, it morphs, but you can still see the kernel, the nugget of where it came from. Just as with every legend, you can find that nugget of truth there, which kept getting elaborated on over time until it's something almost unrecognizable. And we keep doing this. We keep grabbing these old ideas and these old fears and basically repackaging them. And that's essentially what we do in cinema in a big way. I mean, the idea that somebody's watching your every move, that feeds into Big Brother, that feeds into Minority Report, that feeds into, the movies where you're stalked by a ghost or whatever else. It's the sense that you cannot find isolation, and then of course the other side is all you have is isolation.
Right. Yeah.
And both extremes are bad. Is basically what it comes down to in our way of being human. But the Gothic stories, there's one you should really check out. I don't know if it would be classified as Gothic, but the story that the series of stories that really influenced H.P. Lovecraft. It's called. Damn it! I had the name. God, I keep doing this. I've been pushing it for a while. It's is it the Crimson King?
Oh, the Yellow King.
Yellow King, thank you. The Yellow
Yeah.
King, yes. Yes, the Yellow King. If you haven't read that book of all those stories, there's really, I think, 3 of them that are the top.
Right.
You know, one of them does have to deal with loss. But, man, that first one, holy crap. It is insanity incarnate. I mean, just wow. So you can go back and you can see what they were doing, which is basically what that author was doing was taking all these different ideas of how society would change and what that effect would be on people when you dissect it long enough. I mean, he's talking about them putting in suicide booths in the street, and this is like 1911 when he wrote this. So I mean, it's just wow. It's just crazy stuff. But we have those things that kind of follow us around. And if you dig back far enough, you can see where they came from, or at least you'll have a point of what you think is the origin until you start digging deeper. And then it's just this well you fall down. If you do enough ancient history study, man, the you fall down the hole and it's really deep.
Yeah.
Oh, fascinating.
Now that I've completely gotten this off the topic. What was the topic again?
No, that was actually... No, you've actually just filled out Don's topic. That's actually perfect.
Yay!
Yeah, no. You were definitely the right person to have on this show, Paul.
Yeah.
Wow, I've never heard that before. This is cool. I'll have to put that in my biography. Somebody finally said I was perfect for a show. Too bad I'm not a permanent member of it.
Well, you're always welcome to come back, sir. You've definitely earned it.
Aw, you're too kind. You're too kind.
But this is a horror podcast, not a love fest. So, Don, what's your last kind of horror?
The last one, and it's interesting because once again that kind of leads into it.
Okay.
Is what nowadays you see referred to as urban horror, which is kind of, it's horror, but not. Does
it involve skunks and raccoons?
No, it's well, it could, depending if you're doing a weird lycanthrope sort of story. A were-skunk would be horrifying.
Were-skunk, oh my god. I had that same thought before you said it. Holy shit, I gotta write that story now. I have got to write that story of a were-skunk.
I've never, oh my god, I've never seen that.
You're gonna hang out with his buddies, the were-squirrel and the were-armadillo. It'll be awesome. Oh, I just got a great idea for a Twilight parody. Oh, Lord
no.
Almighty.
Oh, no.
Oh, yeah. So anyway, okay, let's get back. Urban horror. Okay, my brain is not quite processing these statements. What do you mean by that?
Like I say, these are just kind of catchphrases I've been using to separate. Urban horror is what you get, like you said, you mentioned Twilight. You talk Blade. You talk about the Dresden Files.
That's urban fantasy.
It is, and what's happened is you've got this story where they'll take like the urban fantasy, they take the trappings of fantasy and make them mundane. It's the same thing with the urban horror idea. You take something like a vampire or a werewolf or a ghost, things that we considered supernatural, that were implements of horror, and you make them mundane. And it's the idea that we had the big spate after Twilight took off of like vampire stories, where basically they weren't monsters, they sat around whining about their girlfriends all the time. and
the emo vampire.
Well, kind of, and you could say that comes from like the Gothic romances, like the Draculas, the Carmelas, those kind of stories from like the 1800s. But what makes the current version different was that Dracula was still a supernatural entity, even though he fit into our world. He was like a parasite living within it. He wasn't of it. Whereas something like Twilight, you've got, okay, you're a vampire that goes to school because I guess, and you're you're vegetarian.
And I'm on the hunt for my next 14-year-old. Gee, thanks for giving us that idea, guys.
I'm hunting for teenage girls. Even though I'm over 100 years old.
There's just something completely and totally wrong with that. That's why I can't read those books. Besides the fact that writing is shitty. But no, thank you.
See, that was that was the only part of it that I can't say I'm okay with. But I thought was okay because it's creepy, and these are monsters, and they're supposed to be creepy, and vampires. To quote Sam Vimes from the Discworld books, vampires are perfectly fine right up till the point they aren't. Like,
you say the same thing about politicians.
Politicians, vampires,
politicians, vampires, CEOs, yeah, it's all the same.
All the same thing, yeah.
Yeah, but that was the idea, that they took what's supposed to be a figure of fear and menace, or at best is supposed to be the other, that it's not human anymore. It's you might be able to interact with it, but you'll never fully understand it, and they sort of drag it down to our level, I guess is the word that I'm still thinking. Twilight. That's basically what they do. So it's no longer a tool of fear. It's basically it's just like an odd guy.
But at that point, it's no longer really horror, is it?
It is, and this is again, like I say, it pays to not get too wrapped up around the axle, because you've taken one of these tools of horror, one of these things that we would,
tropes.
Yeah, the tropes and that, something that we would inject into a story to give it that supernatural edge, and you've taken that thing and removed the supernatural from it in a way.
Yeah, but in the process, you've completely defanged it from being able to even make you feel icky.
Yep, and that's what the urban horror thing is. You've basically come up with a weird superhero story.
Yeah, that's urban fantasy.
That's urban fantasy. That's Buffy the Vampire Slayer. That's Dresden, as you mentioned it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
but there's still so basically the hero people are just as screwed up as what they're fighting. I think is really what you're coming down to. Only there are some things out there that even scare the shit out of them.
Well, that's how I think it started, and you go to the 80s, but I think we've gotten to the point where those things just aren't really scary. Like I say, they're odd, but they're not supernatural. We've taken like the divine and the demonic and made it mundane. Like again, if you go by Twilight, like I had friends who were huge fans, so I know more of the story than anyone ever should. You get the problem that, like, okay, so dad finds out she's dating a vampire, and he's like cool with it, and he doesn't even have to like use mind powers on him or nothing. It's just, oh, you're a vampire. That's like I don't know, it's like being from South America or something, isn't it? I guess, you know. we're all woke here. And that's why I say everybody makes, notes the fact he's like 100 years old and he's hitting on this teenage chick. No, to me, that was the only part of the story that made sense, because that's creepy, and he's supposed to, he's a monster. He's a supernatural thing. He's not like us. The world doesn't work for him the way it does for us. He lives forever. That messes with your perception of time. He was like young when he got turned into this eternal thing, so he's perpetually like a 19-year-old, and that does weird things to you.
That's a valid point. He is a perpetual teenager. Okay,
but again, it's you've taken all of that, and you filed off a lot of the really weird stuff, and as part of that, a lot of the weird consequence, and that's why when you had all of these like Twilight ripoffs, they were just basically vampires are your neighbors. Well, okay, I guess, and more they'd gloss over that idea of it's a vampire. To go with Paul's idea, if you go to the 80s, there was a TV show called Nick Knight, and he was a vampire cop, and I hated it because they kind of took away. They said, well, he'd go. I forget, it was like he'd go to the blood bank or something. And that's how he'd feed. But that takes the horror out of the vampire when you do that. And I think again that you had Anne Rice at that time where they were still monsters, but you were getting more into their head. And then as that progressed, like we get to the point that, like I say now, a lot of stories, like a lot of novel series come out now that follow this idea that you've taken the supernatural and made it mundane.
Right.
And
Okay.
and I think that constitutes a whole other thing. And like you say, it's not really horror. It's where horror jumps that line, but it follows that genealogy, and that's why I put that kind of as the capper to the list.
Okay, well, you can.
So it's horror that's jumped the shark. Okay.
Well, yes and no. I mean, when I think about urban fantasy, there are some good urban fantasies out there that do have a really good feel for horror, even though you're essentially dealing with a monster as the protagonist.
Right.
So I mean, there's a lot of different things you can do there. Says the guy who's basically going to start writing urban fantasy probably next year. There are a lot of different things you can do to, even though certain aspects of the world may be mundane, even though they're supernatural or paranormal, there is that entire other level where you can bring in the baddies, the Lovecraftian stuff, and make the world weird, make it sort of unrecognizable. There was in the role-playing game Werewolf, they would travel to, I can't remember what they called it now. It was like they would shift out of this reality and then go into this other reality where the world looked completely different. So, for instance, if I'm around a school where there's all this happy people and the trees are great and wonderful, when I flip over there, it's full of color. It looks very inviting. Whereas if I go to a chemical dump or a waste dump or something like that, that's where the monsters live. In this other reality. I can't remember what it was. The Umbra, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, yes.
I knew Don would know it. Yeah.
There you go, the Umbra. So, I mean, that idea of being trapped into an existence where you're constantly flipping back and forth between those two realms, and Dresden does that with the Fae. It weirds perception, and that's another part that creeps us out, is when you take something that you should recognize and you just skew it enough. Like, for instance, if you see a person walking towards you and their arms are too long.
Yeah.
Oh, you've been to Windsor.
I thought y'all just had these humongous heads that you could barely keep up on your necks.
With our flapping
London,
heads and
actually.
beady eyes.
There you go. There you go. It's the beady eyes that do it. But when you see humans out of proportion, it does something. It looks odd, and it looks odd and not a wow, that's funny looking. It looks odd and oh my god, what is that? And it's another reason why folks who had physical deformities way back in the day were sometimes put to death.
Yeah.
For that very reason, because it's the child of a demon or whatever else. No, you dumbass, it's called a birth defect. But it's simple stuff like that where the mundane gets weirded, for lack of a better term, and then you can really scare the hell out of people. And just the idea of somebody seeing a face where there are no eyes. It's the fact that it plays on our expectations of what is real and then dices them to pieces by just adding one detail that just does not make any sense to our brains.
Yep. I remember when I was a kid, actually, the first Nightmare on Elm Street movie, I don't know if you remember, there was an ad for that movie where it's Freddy walking you can just see his silhouette. He's walking down an alley and his arms are stretched up. The arms keep getting longer. And as a kid, or young person, whatever, at that point, it freaked me the hell out.
Yeah.
You really didn't know what the hell you were looking at, and just those extras weird long arms. It's just like, ugh.
Yeah, and that's where that was where that jumped into my thoughts. But there's also I have a plan. There's a scene for one of the last Black books that I will definitely put in there, but that will have some shades of that. But basically, imagine you're walking toward a person, talking to them, and they're in the shadows, and then the closer you get, the weirder the shadow looks.
Right.
Suddenly, it no longer looks human.
Yeah. It's like, that's
even
great.
if it's just a trick of the light. Even if it's just a trick of the light, or maybe a stray ray of light strikes something on them and just gives you a brief glimmer of the eyes, those little things can really send you into a spin. And part of what I do is, and it's not really conscious, but part of what I do is I take those little pieces and I just make them bizarre. And that's why you get the fun. That's why you get folks who are having to turn the page and at the same time terrified to turn the page. That's the whole point of doing that. And I bring that to my science fiction. I bring that to my fantasy. I bring that to more or less anything I write, even if it's not considered quote unquote horror. The bottom line is I'm there to give you a sense of the uncanny, because those are the kind of books that I write.
Right. Makes sense.
Yeah.
Actually, and I think that's an excellent segue. So why don't we actually start talking about your books, Paul? I mean, we've already talked about the street, but why don't we start going into a little bit of your background? So where did you start as a writer?
Oh boy. Please give me more context than that.
Okay. What was the first book that you wrote, Paul?
The first full-length book that I wrote has never seen the light of day. Actually, the first three have never seen the light of day.
And that's just because they were just was it what was this? Not shelf novel. There's another term
trunk
for it.
novel.
Yeah, trunk novels. There we go. There's your trunk novels, are they?
Yeah, they're trunk novels. They've been read by probably fewer than 20 people, thankfully.
Right.
I wrote. What was I doing? I guess I was writing urban fantasy back in. That would have been 90, 91. And also was writing it in high school, and then I wrote some literary fiction that was still too spec fic in the mid 90s, and basically all those efforts were fails in the best sense of the word, because I basically learned a lot from them. But the first full length novel I wrote when I came back to writing was Closet Treats.
Oh, okay. Is Closet Treats a novel? I've heard you mention it on the Dead Robot Society podcast, but I always assumed it was probably an anthology.
No, that one's an actual novel.
Okay. So what's Closet Treats about?
It is about a psychotic, not a psychopath, a psychotic. You know the difference?
Okay. You better define it for our audience.
Okay, psychopath goes out and kills people because they're delusional. Psychotic is just delusional.
Right.
And that means that they can see things that aren't there. That means they can be under the reality can switch for them.
Right.
Right. So anyway, it's a psychotic who sees an ice cream truck drive down his neighborhood that is the windows are all blacked out, and what he sees driving is a demon.
Right.
And he doesn't know if it's real.
Right.
And so it's a psychological horror book, and it gets pretty bad. But it's a fun place to play, and I did lots of horrible things to that character, whom I loved very much. And it's actually based on a real incident, which is I was working on a book I still haven't managed to finish called The Day the Town Died. And I heard the ice cream truck, do your balls hang low, or do they wobble to and fro, going on outside.
Yeah.
And so I open up the door, and here's this white Econoline van that's been, tricked out and whatever to be an ice cream truck, but all the windows were tinted.
Right.
It was creepy as freaking hell. And I was just like, what in the fuck is this shit? So I wrote an essay about it and put it up on shadowpublications.com, my podcast. And then people were like, when are you writing this story? I was like, there's no story here. There's no story here. 6 months later, I finished the damn book.
Right.
So
So you've been writing short stories by this point for a little while for your podcast and stuff.
Yeah, I was writing The Fiend's Tales. And then I wrote the novella Tattoo, which is what really got my podcast to be popular.
Okay, what was Tattoo about?
Tattoo is about a reporter who follows up on a series of murders that involve tattoos being flayed off of the bodies.
Oh, lovely.
And what he comes to discover is there's a very, very, very deranged person who is committing these crimes, but it's also I guess it's really a conversation about what identity is, how you identify yourself, and what you use to identify yourself, and what happens when you lose your identity.
Right.
So, but it was pretty popular back in the day. I still get asked when I'm going to write a sequel to it. So.
Oh, very cool. No, I was wondering because a lot of your single name ones I've noticed usually tend to be connected with your Garaga's children's saga in one form or another. So I was wondering if it was part of that.
Wow, things are going to get really crazy here. All right, so in Tattoo, there's a character named Jackson who's the protagonist. He talks to a buddy of his who's a cop named Dewhurst.
Right.
Dewhurst is in Closet Treats. He's in Tattoo. Tony Downs has two of his own stories that are out there. He's also in Tattoo and Closet Treats.
Right.
Well, all three of those characters are also in Gare's Inferno, which we're releasing next month.
Right, so they are all in the same setting as your Garaga's children's saga thing.
Yes, they are. And when I write the first Tony Downs novel, hopefully next year, which will be the kickoff for the Urban Fantasy series, then you'll see how it all kind of ties together.
How all that ties together. All right, so you better tell our audience about Garaga's children as well. I know this because you talk about it in the Dead Robot Society podcast, but Don and the rest of our audience have no idea what we're talking about.
Okay, so... Wow, where do I begin? Well, let's begin with the beginning. I know you've heard this story because I'm sure I related on DRS, but I was walking the dog one night, listening to Pseudopod, and the story was that they were playing, and Pseudopod is a horror podcast. It's out there. They do short stories every week. A very good one. Go check them out. That story was not captivating me, so I was walking the dog. I was on my way back, and it was a story about a mom and a dad, and they were talking about some shit with the baby, whatever. And I heard a voice in my head say, "Would you like to know about your father, little one?" And I was like, all right, that's creepy. Tell me more. So I went home and I banged out a story called The Things I Do for Love. And for some reason, I still don't understand where it came from. This word Garaga came out. And the character in The Things I Do for Love is told in first person. She mentions the fact that there's this Garaga thing that she worships, and the more you go through it, you begin to understand that it's more than just that. And after that, I was like, wow, I need to write more of these stories because I really dig this. And I was like, you know what? I need to go back to the beginning of time and figure out how all this worked. So I wrote Legends of Garaga and Daemons of Garaga, which basically chronicle human beings coming in contact with Nephilim. Nephilim is an ancient term that's in the Bible, I think, once. But it's in Mesopotamian lore long before that. Basically, what these are the children of gods. Right. Demigods is what I guess the Greeks would have called them. But in my universe, there's a little bit of a different shift on that. But anyway, the Garaga Tales, the two books that are out there, take place between prehistory and the first burning of the Library of Alexandria. And basically, one book is from the human's point of view, and the other book is from the daemon's point of view. 3 stories from the daemon's point of view, an entire lineage. Right. So, but the Garaga thing is, I guess the best way to describe it is it's kind of like my version of Cthulhu, to a certain degree. Only it's very interested in getting access to this planet or this world, this dimension,
this plane of existence.
There you go. This plane of existence, and its children are essentially succubi and incubi.
Huh. So it plans to get here by having people have lots of sex?
I refuse to answer that question on the grounds that it may make people go buy the book. Yes. There are some very, very erotic elements to the Garaga stories, and that's very purposefully done. So it's a rip-off of some things, but I was just trying to come up with a different way, and the way The Things I Do for Love went off, I was like, oh, okay, so we're not a sexual vampire per se, we're something else. We're a sexual conduit. Oh, okay, I'm cool with this. So that's where things went. And the books did not sell well, but I have never gotten a bad comment about them. And there are people who are just absolutely rabid about them. And whenever I drop a reference to Garaga in any of my other stuff, they completely freak out and start asking questions. And I know that when Gare's Inferno comes out, just from what some of the beta readers have said, that particular cadre of my audience is going to lose their shit. It'll be fun. Right. It'll be fun. So yeah, those are stories, and the plan is that I'm going to write Garaga stories to take place during the First Crusade. I'm going to write Garaga stories to take place during the Spanish Inquisition, during the French Revolution, and things that here happen in the Old West.
Right.
So
now, what makes a Garaga story a Garaga story? Like, is there some special element besides the fact that, Garaga gets name dropped and there's like sexy demons?
Sometimes Garaga doesn't ever really get dropped. It's I guess what it comes down to is it's more along the lines of I'm either looking at it from the human's point of view, have no idea what the hell's going on, or they're trying to figure out what's going on. Probably the best story of the whole bunch is called Scrolls, and there's no real horror in it at all, but it is about a scribe who at the Library of Alexandria who is discovering all these things that should not exist, all these tablets and everything else, and those tablets are actually referenced in an earlier story. And he starts to put things together and then realizes there's a conspiracy at the library to do something with them, something bad. So, but it's all about him finding that out. And he never comes across any of Garaga's children. He never comes across Garaga itself. But there is that tension of it where he's learning about what happened in the past. So it just kind of depends on where it is. Most of the Garaga tales will either have a hunter or one of the children.
Okay.
Most of them, not all of them. Most of them.
Yeah. Okay. So that's how it usually ties in. Okay, interesting. Now, do you podcast most of these books? Like, are you reading almost all these books on the air?
Oh boy, I have podcasts. Let's see. The only book that I did not read, and I read portions of it, was Daemons of Garaga, because I originally put out all the Garaga's tales as Garaga's Children Ancients, which was a limited edition hardcover. So I did the audio book for that. But since then, I had Veronica Jaguar do the reading for Daemons of Garaga, and I had John Miro redo Closet Treats. So those are actually up for sale on Audible. I can't even remember if I podcasted Daemons of Garaga. I podcasted so many books. Oh my God.
Wow.
Yeah, I did the original Closet Treats. I did Tattoo. I did all my short stories. I did the Black series, Derelict, which I'm hopefully wrapping up portions of it anyway.
Right.
And I will be podcasting. Well, I will be recording Gare's Inferno, and that's going to be a podcast exclusively available for my Patreon patrons.
Okay, good plan. Huh. No, but do you think that having a podcast and doing the readings there, what has that really done for your writing career? How has that actually helped you build an audience?
Well, back when I started, I mean, I've been doing this for, good God, 8 or 9 years. I've been doing it a long time. The scary part is Sigler's been doing it for 12 or 13.
Yes, he has.
He stubborn old fart, and I think T. Morris is probably 15 or 16 years. Anyway,
yep.
Regardless, back in the day, back before Twitter sucked, back when, social media, there was no book for your face and there wasn't all that crap, we basically just kind of started talking with other writers. And I was like, I hadn't written in a long time. My wife was like, there's this Scott Sigler guy, you should check him out. So I listened to podcasts for about a year. And then she was like, when are you going to start doing this? I was like, what? When are you going to start writing again? Figure out what gear you need and let's put it together. Oh, right. Shit. Okay, fine. So then I started doing that. I dug out some old short stories, fixed them up, and put them out there. And my audience went from 20 to 100 for about a good 8 months.
Right.
And then Tattoo broke through because I created a really badass promo for it, and it brought a lot of people in. And they stuck around. They spread the word, and more people kind of follow me around on that stuff. And I ended up on a lot of different podcasts with a lot of other fiction podcasters who were really starting out. Sigler, I think, called us the third wave. Folks like Jake Bible, Scott Roche, John Miro, all these different folks from writing all these different things. And it was just incestuous the way we traded fans back and forth. It was insane because somebody would be like, I'm listening to John Miro, Paulie, Cooley, and Jake Bible this week. It was like, score. Yeah. So the podcast stuff brings people in, and or can anyway. And since I switched over to doing YouTube for a couple of my books, the Black books specifically right now, that has also brought some people in. Right. And hopefully those people end up buying books, or they become Patreon patrons or whatever else, and it still works quite well. But I would not be where I am today if I had not started the podcast.
Right. But on an opposite note, though, would you advise someone who was thinking about podcasting their books or stories of that today to do the same thing you did? Because it's not the same world it was when you started out. Not at all.
No, it's not the same world. And yet, you look at the Black Tapes, Welcome to Night Vale, and some of these other podcasts that are pretty popular right now. And I still think that there is a very fertile market for that. I mean, Pseudopod has still got, 10 or 20,000, maybe more listeners a week. Same thing with Escape Pod and et cetera. I think it just depends on what your goals are. If you want to get your stuff out there and put it in such a way that folks are going to give it a try, it's a lot easier to do as a podcast, in my thinking, than it is to put a goddamn ebook up on Kindle for free. Because you just get completely lost in all the flotsam and jetsam that's out there.
That's true.
So I think it's actually easier if you do some engagement with other writers who are doing the podcasting scene. Go listen to the podcasts that are out there, see what they're doing that works, see what's not working, and then try and make it your own. I had my own shtick, which was the Fiend Master thing, and I pretty much abandoned that, although everybody still calls me it. But it was a shtick that I grew out of, and my audience, probably some of them still miss it. And I'll bring it back every now and then just because. But, that's pretty much, I've changed that. I mean, the tagline for shadowpublications.com is "We don't believe in happy endings." And I've since changed that because I was writing the science fiction stuff to where some mysteries shouldn't be solved. And I think that's actually a more commercially viable thing, but I like it too. Yeah. But just because the mysteries shouldn't be solved doesn't mean there's going to be a happy ending. So it kind of goes along together. Okay. There's still an ominous tone to it. It's just not quite as bad as me telling you, all these people you love are going to kill them all.
They're all screwed.
Yeah, they're all screwed. So, everybody's like, what's the body count going to be in this book? Well, you just have to wait and see. I mean, I have a site. I have a part of my site called The Graveyard, and I don't know how many names are on there now. It's all folks who donated to Shadow Publications or were early, original fiendlings, as my fans call themselves. And I put them in there, and then people were basically begging me to kill them in a book. I am not shitting you. It is scary.
No, I believe it.
And there's got to be at least 50 names on there now of folks that I've dealt with in some manner. They've either become a character. They're either been a character, a corpse, or a red shirt.
Right.
So, in fact, there's one. The running gag is Thomas Reed, who's died or been a corpse in nearly every one of my books because he pissed me off once. So, it is just he was probably my first Sigler supporter and really helped me get me on the map, which is why I don't mind putting him in every book. But the joke is he complained that he died before. He's mentioned in Tattoo, and he died before the story started. So after that, he was toe tag treed. So whenever there's a morgue scene or anything like that, there's always a T.R. Reed there somewhere.
Right.
And the fans that have been with my work long enough, they're always looking through the book, waiting for the tree to show up. So it's just little things like that you do, and that's all part of building the community. And people find out about the graveyard, they go in there and they look, and they're like, "Holy shit!" These are all people that have talked to Paul at one point, and he's killed every one of them.
Oh my God, Paul's a serial killer.
So it's just you find these little ways to kind of build your audience and community, and try and make it so that it's fun. You can write these serious books and still have a really good time, poke fun at yourself. Jake Bible, we call each other our nemesis, and we're really great friends. But man, we kick the shit out of each other in social media on a regular basis. And it's just one of those things. And I'm sure there are some listeners and readers of mine and some of his that don't understand that we're, just bashing each other for the hell of it.
Right.
They think there's some kind of real blood feud going on, and it's not. It's just all part of, building up the community and having a good time. And I think that writers sometimes, artists in general, can take themselves too seriously. And I think that's when you make a lot of mistakes. I don't want to take myself seriously. I want to have a good time. I want the folks that read my books to have a good time. Some of them like to be scared. Some of them like to go, ew. And, there are others who are just like, wow, that was really fucked up. I want to give them those experiences. And those are the people that read my books. And so just find ways to reach out to them. But yeah, without the podcast, man, none of this would have happened. None of it.
Right. Well, did the podcast also lead to you being on the Dead Robot Society as well?
Yes, it did, actually. God, I can't even remember his name now. Shit, that's so bad. One of the co-hosts listened to, I think it was Mama. One of the first ones I put up there, and he wanted to get me on there to talk about horror. And Terry Mixon liked me immediately. We have no idea why.
Right.
And so did Justin. So when he left the show, they got Eliana on there, and by then they'd had me on a few more episodes. And then when Eliana left, they invited me to come on the show full time.
Right. Yeah, I've been listening for years, and I don't even remember who that original other guy was. I don't even remember his name.
Oh, so bad. Boy. He was the drummer, and I can't remember his freaking name. It's terrible. But man,
and he was there for good 50, 60 episodes.
Yeah, he was there for quite a while. It's so hard to keep track of DRS because it's been around over 10 years now.
Yeah, you guys just did episode 400 something, so yes.
465 is the one that dropped today.
Wow, yeah. That's a long running show.
Yeah, and I've been on there since, good Lord, 200 something, I think?
Huh. Yeah, about that.
Yeah.
And so, isn't it hard to constantly come up with new topics for a show like that?
It is, and it's not. I mean, just one of the reasons Justin kind of called it quits for a while was he's just like, we're recycling the same old bullshit. And I can see how he burns out on that. But Terry and I kind of, when we took the show in kind of a different way. We wanted to talk about little things and just let it go into a conversation instead of picking apart one topic and see where it goes, kind of like what we're doing here. And I think actually those are the most fun and the best shows, and sometimes some really important thoughts come out of that, some really important conclusions. And I think that's why a lot of writers, the writers that we have in our audience, I think that's why they listen to us. It's not just because we're complete jackasses, although that's probably a big part of it. But the fact is that we're both working writers. We're both making money and able to do it full time. Of course, now I have a part-time gig on top of it. Don't even get me started on that one. But we've had success. We've had success, so we feel like we can talk about some of the things that newer writers should be aware of, and even things that we are learning as we go through the craft. It's not like we know everything. In fact, we like to say we don't know anything. And we don't realize what we know until we start talking about what we don't know, which is when it's really fun. So it's just a matter of, take something, like a conversation on verisimilitude. It's all this common sense stuff, but when you really start digging into it, you realize that there are some things you can do and some things you can't do. And It's just simple conversations like that. And since we started approaching it that way, I look forward to doing that show every week because I never know what Terry's going to say. I never know what I'm going to say. Right. I never know when Terry will just toss out some comment and immediately I get a story idea from it because he's a son of a bitch.
Yeah.
I hate him so much. So, yeah, I mean, that's why he and I do the unexpurgated version on Patreon where it's like 2 hours long, no edits or anything. That's what the patrons get. Whereas the show is like watered down to like 50 minutes to an hour for the regular podcast feed. But it's just so much fun to do that. And we don't run out of things to talk about if we do it that way.
Okay, I can kind of see that. It's a little bit like that for Dawn and I here as well. Whereas, yeah, we pick topics and then we just kind of riff on them and we just see what happens.
Yeah, I mean, you can start talking about horror and end up in ancient Mesopotamia.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. I think I don't think we've actually talked about horror for the last like 15, 20 minutes at least.
No, that's because you said, Paul, tell me about yourself 3 hours later.
Exactly. And well, okay. Okay, in that sense, we are still talking about horror. But anyway.
Touche.
But actually we should hear about, okay, so your best-selling horror book then is The Black, right?
Yes. If you're going to go by horror, yes. The Black is definitely the bestseller.
Okay, so, and you've done, 2 Black sequels, or is it like 3?
There's 3 books in the series right now.
Okay, 3 books in the series right now, because I've heard you mention on the show there might be another one eventually.
There's definitely going to be at least 2 more. There may be more than that, but Evolution, I've got, 30,000 words on. I just need to go back and finish it after I finish Derelict.
Right. Okay, so let's hear about The Black then. Give us our audience the pitch so they want to go out and buy it.
The Black is, here's my elevator pitch. John Carpenter's The Thing meets The Blob meets Alien on an exploratory oil rig in 30,000 feet of water.
Huh.
Okay, that'll do it. Although, that reminds me, I'm not accusing you of ripping off anything, although you obviously you have your various
absolutely
sources.
I ripped off as much as I could. What are you talking about?
Because I remember back in the 80s, it basically amounted to Alien, but it was set on an oil rig. I'm trying to remember what the damn thing was called. Oh, and it wasn't The Invader Within or something like that, where they bring up something and then, like, it's mutating the people on the oil rig. I'm not talking Deep Star 6. This was an actual above-sea oil rig. And there's, like, a scene where one guy walks in and the thing's, like, and there's, like, this little fairy-type thing flying around in the room. Do either of you know what I'm talking about?
I do, but I don't remember what it was called.
It sounds familiar, but I'm missing a lot of details. I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know.
Let me see if I can find it. I think it's called like the Invader Within or Enemy Within or something like that.
Yeah, I think you're right.
I think that's it.
Enemy Within.
Yeah.
The Invader Within. Is it Invader Within? I'm just quickly checking.
There's also a Korean one that's out there as well that somebody, after I wrote The Black, sent me a link to it because they were absolutely positive I'd seen the movie, which I had not.
Huh.
Right. Do you watch much like Asian horror films?
I do occasionally. I actually watched. I read Ringu before I saw it.
Right.
Which is the one The Ring is based on, the American version. I read that first because Suzuki is a really good writer, and the guy who does translations is really fantastic as well.
Right.
So that and The Grudge, Jingu. Those are just, whoa, if you go watch the original Japanese versions, holy shit. So there's some really good stuff in there. The Korean cinema is, the Koreans make some really, really good horror movies, and so do the Thai. They've just got some really creepy stuff out there. And they've also got some really ridiculous ones out there.
But the Koreans are really fucked up. Like, the Japanese stuff is weird, but the Korean stuff is like fucked up. I'm
sorry. Have you seen Tokyo Police? Holy crap! Okay,
there is that, but that's just bizarre.
When the giant penis turns into this creature, and just wow. Yeah. I wish I was kidding, but I'm not.
Yeah. No, you're not. I remember. By the way, just a quick pause. It's actually called The Intruder Within.
Oh, Intruder Within.
It came out in 1981. The tagline is, "When the oil brings death, the rig is doomed." The crew of members of a secluded oil rig near Antarctica face extinction when a deep-sea parasite infests the platform, lays its eggs, and spawns its offspring.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's it. And I remember it's effectively, it's basically Alien. It's basically just Alien set on an oil rig for the most part.
Gotcha. Yeah, the black is altogether different than that. There are no similarities whatsoever.
Okay, yes, of course not. Yeah. None in the slightest.
No, not at all. The crew of Leaguer, which is an exploratory vessel, exploratory oil rig, sets off to digging a new trench, drilling a new trench called M2, and what they bring up is not oil. It looks like oil. It pretends to be oil, but it ain't oil.
But it ain't oil, which it's the black.
It's the black.
Yeah.
And the whole idea was to come up with something that couldn't be necessarily categorized. And to have a bunch of scientists running around going, what in the fuck is that, is so much fun.
Yeah.
Because you get this chance to say, if I'm going to create a really weird creature, the easiest way to do it is to have it break all the laws of physics and chemistry and biology as we understand it. Because it creeps you it just creeps you out because it doesn't make any damn sense. So basically, a lot of the science research I did on that was figuring out how to make something that they could see that and test it, and it would look like the greatest oil on the planet, and then have it not act like it at all. So it was just a lot of fun to do those kinds of things. And the black was a lot of fun to write. It was a lot of fun to write, and that's really what put my career on. It basically was the skyrocket. It was the moment.
Right. Huh. Right. Wow. Okay. No, that's why you've done 2 sequels so far, and there'll be 2 more, and I assume that they sell fairly well. Hopefully.
Yeah. Hopefully.
Okay, and then now Relics, is that you doing like the space opera thing?
Oh, Derelict?
Yeah, Derelict, sorry.
Derelict is basically it's like 500 years of the future. Humankind is running out of resources, and so they get together and they put together this massive ship to go out and look for new resources. 7 years into its mission, it disappears. Never heard from again. Until it comes spinning back into the outer Kuiper belt.
Right.
Dead. And they send a Marine Corps search and rescue vessel to go see what happened. And hilarity ensues.
Of course, yes. It always does. Yeah.
So if you're like a big fan of Dead Space and things like that, it will probably really, really suck you in. But I'm hopefully I'll have it. I won't finish it in this book, in Destruction, but I think I'll get it done in 1 more book. So there's 2 of those out right now.
Okay. And there'll be 4 books in total.
Probably, but then there's going to be, there's going to be at least one that takes place after the Derelict saga is done, and I've got at least 4 more set for that universe. I just don't know if they'll be Severed Press books or not.
Okay. So most of your stuff's coming out through Severed Press then?
Those books are, yes. Scares Inferno is a shadowpublications.com gig.
Okay.
So I'm a hybrid author. I do both independent and traditional publishing.
Very cool. So, Don, did you have any questions? You're mostly sitting there quietly in the background.
Listen to all the different books. I think you've kind of illustrated one of the, I guess, difficulties that somebody who wants to be a writer nowadays has, is that you can't just be a writer anymore. Well, I mean, I guess you can if you get like with a big company, you get like a press agent.
No, even then, the world has changed so much. Back when I was trying to get published in the '90s, early '90s, mid '90s, it was you had to get an agent, then you had to go get a publisher, and they paid you in advance. If you were a mid-lister, probably between $5,000 and $10,000 upon start of the book and the end of the book, whatever. And then you would see no royalties whatsoever. Because you had to earn out against that advance. In a way they'd set it up, you could never earn out that advance. But if that book sold like crazy, then they would pay you more for the next book, for the next book, for the next book, for the next book, that kind of thing. But it was still a crapshoot because you were relying on the publisher to do all the right things to make sure the book would go. And you were powerless to do anything about it. There was no way for you to promote it. There was no way, especially if you were broke, there was no way for you to do anything to promote anything. The tools just were not there. So flash forward, 20 years where we are now, it is a completely different ballgame. Now the publishers are relying on the authors to do the PR for the most part. Now the publishers, the big publishers, especially if you're a mid-lister, you will be lucky if you get $2,500 as an advance and still see no fucking royalties. And they will take all your audiobook rights. They will take all your movie rights. They will take all this and everything else and leave you with nothing.
Wow.
Yep.
Which is why I am with the small press where I have a lot of clout, and I got a really, really good royalty deal, and I kept all the audio rights. So I make and that's another reason why I do my own audiobooks is basically pure profit.
Wow.
And when you sell, 5,000 of them in 2 years, it's a good rate of return.
Yeah, that is.
So,
what percentage do you get off the audiobooks on Audible?
Oh, God.
You don't have to tell me the actual price.
They screw us so bad. If you go exclusive with them, they give you a whopping 40%. If you don't go exclusive with them, you get a whopping 25%.
Ooh.
So they, as far as I'm concerned, they take way too goddamn much money for what they actually do for you. But I've discovered since I did the Black exclusive and I did Derelict non-exclusive is I lost my ass on Derelict, money-wise. So it's Derelict is probably the last series I will do non-exclusive with them for now until somebody disrupts the market.
Right, which is probably not going to happen because I believe isn't Audible actually owned by
It's
Amazon?
owned by the gorilla, yes. It's owned by the gorilla. So when we talk about market disruption, we're down to the big five. There used to be like 10 or 12 big publishers, and then the massive consolidations happened, and now we're down to 5 of them that own like 1,000 billion imprints, each one of them does. And so, fuck one, fuck everybody. That's basically their attitude.
Right. Yeah.
Just as they are in deep shit, Amazon has reaped the rewards of putting them of them not evolving and them not changing their business model and everything else. Amazon is going to have the same problem because they're doing some really stupid shit right now. And when the content creators start fleeing because they're not getting the money they were used to, Amazon's going to have a problem. They're going to have a real problem because there will be another market disruption. Guarantee it. The whole reason Amazon got up the way it was is because writers could go there and make a mint without having a publisher, without having an agent. We're talking about the old heady days. If you knew what you were doing, knew how to game the system, and et cetera, then you could be a Hugh Howey or a Comrath or somebody like that and make a hell of a lot of money doing it. And that's not to say there aren't good writers. It's simply the fact that when they got in and how they got in, they hit everything perfectly. And they had good business savvy and they knew how to market. If you're able to do that, you can actually make this work for you. But you can't just sit back and say, I'm just going to be a writer. I'm just going to write the words. No, it does not work that way. If you get a contract with the Big Five, they're going to want you to do a lot of the promotional stuff. They're going to want you to do this, that, and the other. They're going to demand that you have a social media account.
Right.
It's stuff like that. They're going to demand you have a website, and guess what? They're not going to pay for it. So, you can kind of draw your own conclusions from that. There's just so many things that you have to do. You have to go on podcasts like this one. You have to go on anytime. You have to go to these cons and be on panels and talk yourself up and talk about other works and get people interested in you. And you go to a con, you pick up 2 readers. It doesn't sound like a whole lot, but if you've got 20 books and they buy every book in your back catalog, now you're talking money. So it's one of these situations where there's a lot of different things you have to do to make it work. You can't just sit back and say, I write, I click the button, and it's done.
Yeah, yeah. You gotta get out there because, of course, the big publishers, they have a advertising budget, but that budget all goes to their top.
Yeah,
earners,
which
right?
is the one thing that doesn't make any goddamn sense to me. Why does Stephen King need PR? What? Why?
He doesn't.
Why does Nora Roberts need PR? You know who needs PR? The mid-lister who's working a dead-end job and writing till 3 a.m. and for eking out a $2,000 income from his writing per year. That's the person who needs the freaking PR, not Stephen King, not Nora Roberts, not Dean Koontz, not any of those folks. And it used to be that they didn't get all the PR, that that budget was actually spent on the mid-listers trying to elevate them. But that was back before we had an editor carousel, where an editor would find a young author, an unknown author, and basically polish them up into a diamond, because that was part of the job. Now, if you go with a big 5 company, you might go through 3 editors before your book is published.
Now, do you think that's partly because there's, as a new author has more access to an audience through the internet, the companies have more access to new authors, so they start seeing them as disposable?
I think I think that they did get to the point of disposability, but that started happening long before Amazon was even around. That started happening when all these companies started consolidating. And you see it, right? When Walmart starts buying up everybody, suddenly their employees and become expendable. You can fill anybody in there; it no longer matters. Yeah. And Amazon and Google and et cetera are getting big enough where that is going to start being a problem for them. But the publishing companies just went whole hog. They tried to run it like a Wall Street deal, where basically it's like give people as little money as you can get away with and bank the profit. It wasn't about making sure that you had a product, and the author is the product. Don't kid yourself. That you had a product that was going to be long-lived. It was, what can you do for me to make my bottom line bigger in this 3-month time span? And America has a lot of fault at perpetuating that. But bottom line is, if you work for enough large companies, you see it. They don't give a shit about long-term growth. All they're concerned about is making that quarter's numbers.
Because that's what gets the executives the bonus.
Exactly. And therefore, yes, everybody is disposable. The people who do the actual work in the oil fields are the ones who get fired or get laid off, not the fuckers sitting up in their offices. It's not the way it works, unfortunately, when they're the ones who need to go. So it's I mean, it's just the same kind of thing. And we've seen it with films, too. You also see this mess where a lot of projects don't get greenlit because folks are worried that it's not going to make enough money, or there's office politics or anything else. And so they won't even give it a shot. And then you see them spend $180 billion on this piece of shit because it's got Brad Pitt in it. It just 180 billion, excuse me. But that's the whole problem with the way this stuff is set up. And even the comic book industry has had that problem. So I'm hoping we break out of this. I'm hoping there's another market disruption and we can get back to doing what should be done, which is, helping these younger artists and unknowns kind of rise up. The folks who are doing really great, groundbreaking stuff. All they need is a freaking spotlight thrown on them for 5 minutes, and they're going to be just blow everybody out of the water. That's where I would love to see our system go, where those folks are valued again for what they are.
Right. Well, on that note, Paul, can you spotlight some, I mean, obviously people should go and check out your work, of course, but are there any other, horror writers or other writers that you'd really like to spotlight, that you'd like our audience to go check out as well?
Phil Rossi, who wrote the groundbreaking, well, not groundbreaking, but it was a very successful podcast called Crescent, which is science fiction horror. Scott Sigler, if you don't know who he is, he's written everything from body horror to YA stuff. And he was a bit of a mentor to me early in the day, so I really love pushing his stuff. Plus, he's a great writer. Jake Bible, who I mentioned earlier. If you have not read Zburbia, go read this book.
Okay,
it's about a a homeowners association during the zombie apocalypse. It is absolutely insane. But it is an awesome series of books. You'll really love the hell out of it. Jake just writes all sorts of bizarre stuff. That's why he's my nemesis. That's why he's my nemesis. But he's another really good one. Scott Roche is starting to put out some good stuff. I'm still waiting for him to get a full length novel out, Scott. But you know, Ed Lauren is another one. Life After Dane is a fantastic book, which will scare the shit out of you. That's some good stuff there. Okay. So those are a few.
Right. So there are a few. There are definitely some good up and coming and new horror writers that maybe aren't getting enough attention, and now they have been.
Well, one would hope that. I mean, Sigler's been an NYT bestseller, so really shouldn't be giving him too much credit. But you know, Matt Wallace is another one who's one of those folks that if you know him, you love everything he's ever written. But if you don't know him, you wouldn't know that.
Right.
You know, same thing with Mur Lafferty.
People need to check him out.
These are all folks that you know were podcasters or in that wave. So I know all these folks and they're really, really good at what they do. Really good at what they do.
Right. Well, they've been honing their craft for a while.
Yes, and just getting better with every book.
I noticed you didn't add like Terry Mixon to that list. Is there any particular reason?
Yeah, because the motherfucker is number 20 on the top science fiction writers. Screw him. He doesn't need any PR.
Okay, there is that.
Screw that guy.
Okay. Okay.
Terry Mixon, my co-host on DRS, he writes really good space opera. He lives and breathes this stuff, and it's no wonder that he'd be a great writer at it. He just is. He's really good at it. So go read his books too. Just don't tell him I said to read them.
Okay. We definitely will. So we better bring this show to a close. Don, was there anything else you want to ask before we finished up for today?
Oh no, there was plenty there. You got a lot of good ideas, and yeah, I was going through the website, going through some of the audiobooks that you got up there. Yeah, there's a lot of good stuff. I do recommend people check that out.
Well, everything that he's talked about will be in the show notes, of course, so people should just, come to obeythedna.com and check out our website. And if you do, you'll find links to everything you need to know, and especially right at the top will be Paul Edward Cooley's Shadow Publication site.
Yay!
So thank you very much, Paul, for coming on the show. We really appreciate it. It's been an awesome time.
Well, thank you very much. This was a lot of fun. Hopefully I didn't get too boring.
No, not at all. This has been great. No, your skill as a podcast host definitely shows.
Oh, thank you.
And on that note, good night, everyone. Have a happy Halloween, and Garaga bless.
Garaga bless. Night, everybody.
Thanks for listening to the show. If you'd like to hear more or join the conversation, come visit us at obeythedna.com. You can also find us on iTunes or whatever fine podcast site forgot to lock their back door. So until next time, remember that to master the nerdly arts takes time, practice, and enough Coca-Cola to drop a rhino. See ya! Come on over and join the conversation at obeythedna.com, where you will find show notes and more.